Today, we're going to tear apart a really powerful and, let's be honest, kind of paradoxical idea. It's a philosophy that really shaped how countries dealt with each other for years. This whole concept of peace through strength. Three little words. You probably hear them and immediately think of Ronald Reagan, right? But believe it or not, the idea goes way, way back, all the way to the Roman Empire. But just look at it. It feels like a complete contradiction, doesn't it? Peace through strength? That's the puzzle we are going to solve right now. And that's really the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, how can building up your military, the very thing you'd use to start a war, actually be the best way to avoid one? To get it, you really have to dig into the logic behind the whole thing.
Okay, so at its heart, it's all about deterrence. The thinking is pretty simple. If you are so powerful that attacking you would be, well, a terrible idea, then nobody's going to try it. Your strength isn't meant to be a sword, it's meant to be a shield. It keeps the peace by making the cost of war just way too high for anyone else to even consider. This breaks it down perfectly. Over on the left, you've got the goal, peace. Simple enough. But on the right, you have the method, strength. So how do you actually draw a line between those two dots in the real world?
Well, to understand the how, you first have to get the why. You know, this philosophy didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was a direct answer to a very specific thing happening in the world. And that thing? The Cold War. Yeah. For the Reagan administration, the #1 challenge, the biggest threat out there, was seen as the Soviet Union. The entire peace through strength idea was built as a response to that specific worldview. So you're facing this massive global challenge. What's your move? How do you take this philosophical idea and actually turn it into a plan? And this brings us to the strategy itself. You know, how the big idea got turned into actual on-the-ground policy. Now, what's really key here is that the administration's policy wasn't about the U.S. just going it alone. No, the whole thing centered on a really important strategic alliance. And that alliance was NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So this wasn't just about one country's power. It was about the collective strength of this entire group of Western nations. And here's the core of it. The main policy was simply to massively expand NATO's military power. This was the single most important step in taking that abstract idea of strength and making it a very real, very intimidating force. Okay, but expanding military power can sound a little vague, right? So let's look at one of the biggest, most decisive actions that was taken as part of this new strategy. As part of this big power-up, NATO put new missiles all throughout Europe. This was a super clear, impossible-to-ignore signal of their new military muscle, and it was aimed squarely at warning off any potential Soviet aggression. It was basically making their strength visible for the whole world to see. So this really lays out the whole chain of logic, step by step. First, you identify what you see as the problem, in this case, the Soviet threat. Step 2, you come up with the strategy. Let's expand our military to deter them. And then step 3, you take real action. You deploy the missiles as a physical show of that new power. All right, so let's pull all these threads together now and see how this entire massive strategy is all packed into that one little phrase. And we're back to this slide, but now it all makes sense, right? We can fill in the blanks. The goal, peace, was specifically defined as pushing back against Soviet threats, and the method, strength, was defined by building up military power and, very concretely, putting missiles on the ground. This is exactly how the philosophy became a real-world strategy. So now when you hear that phrase, you can see the entire doctrine behind it. It's not just a catchy slogan, it's really a summary of a very specific playbook for a very specific time in history. Which leaves us with one final, huge question. We've explained what peace through strength meant back then, but the debate over whether it's a good idea, well, that's still raging. Is threatening force really the most effective way to keep the peace? That's a big one to think about.